Mateo Santana, CEO of a supermarket chain valued at $800 million, was carrying out his monthly inspection at the Vallecas establishment when he witnessed a scene that would change his life forever. A young woman with a baby in her arms and a 4-year-old girl by the hand approached the checkout with 3 items: powdered milk, diapers, and a loaf of bread. When the cashier told her the total of $27, the woman counted and recounted the coins in her purse. Then, her voice breaking with embarrassment, she said, "I'm sorry. I have to return the milk." Mateo watched that mother return the can of powdered milk while her baby cried from hunger and the little girl tugged at her skirt asking when they were going to eat. At that moment, the millionaire who had built an empire selling food to Spanish families realized a devastating truth. While he was counting millions in profits, some mothers had to choose between feeding their children and paying the rent. What he did after that meeting was not just a gesture of charity, but the beginning of a revolution that would transform Spain and the lives of thousands of families. But first he had to confront the darkest secret of his success. Mateo Santana had never set foot in one of their supermarkets as a simple customer. At 42, the man who had transformed a small neighborhood shop into a chain of 347 establishments throughout Spain knew his businesses only through quarterly reports, profit margins, and sales statistics that arrived punctually at his office in the attic of the Madrid headquarters. This November morning, he had decided to make a surprise inspection of the Vallecas supermarket, one of the below-average performing outlets he was considering closing. Dressed in his usual dark gray Armani suit with Italian shoes that cost more than the monthly salary of one of his employees, he walked through the aisles of the establishment, mentally noting every detail that did not meet corporate standards. His life was a perfect mechanism of efficiency and benefits. He would get up every morning at 5:30 in his 400 square meters villa in La Moraleja. He had been exercising for 45 minutes in his private gym. He would read the financial reports during breakfast served by the domestic staff and arrive at the office before 8 a.m. to begin a day that rarely ended before 10 p.m. He had no family. The marriage had ended 50 years earlier, when his wife grew tired of being married to a man who measured everything in terms of revenue and annual growth. Their supermarkets were scientifically designed to maximize customer spending. Essential products placed at the back of aisles to force consumers to walk through the entire store, special offers on impulse items, layout designed to confuse and slow down movement, increasing the likelihood of unplanned purchases. Mateo did not see customers as people, but as consumption units that generated useful data to optimize income and margins. That morning, I was precisely analyzing the location of the dairy section. Children's products were strategically placed next to luxury goods to create a psychological contrast that encouraged parents to spend more. When he noticed a scene that he initially interpreted as a normal case of customer management. A young woman approached the boxes with a tired gait, carrying in her arms a baby that couldn't have been more than 3 months old and leading by the hand a blonde girl of about 4 years old who dragged her feet with the typical childlike tiredness of someone who has walked too much. The woman was at most 25 years old. He was wearing a worn jacket that had seen better days and faded jeans. But what struck Mateo was the expression of determination mixed with despair that lit up her face. In the shopping cart, there were only 3 items arranged with almost religious care: a container of powdered baby milk, a package of diapers, and a loaf of wholemeal bread. Mateo automatically noticed the prices. The milk cost $14, the diapers $11, the bread $2, and he mentally calculated the total while the woman got in line at the checkout. The cashier, a woman in her 50s whom Mateo recognized from the staff photos as Mrs. Rodriguez with 15 years of service at the company, scanned the items with the mechanical efficiency of someone who had done that gesture thousands of times. When the screen showed $27, the young mother opened a synthetic leather purse, so worn that the marks of the broken seams were visible. What followed was a scene that Matthew would relive in his mind for years to come. The woman began counting the coins with hands that were trembling slightly. 50 cents, $1, $2, 50 cents. Once again, he arranged them on the tape of the box, recounted them, grouped them by value, and recounted them again. The baby began to cry, that sharp, desperate cry of very young children who are hungry. While the older girl tugged at her mother's skirt, asking in a thin little voice when they would be going home for lunch, Mateo unconsciously approached, hiding behind the magazine display, fascinated by this mathematics of survival that he had never seen so closely. The woman was exactly 16.30. They were 10 and 70 times short of completing the purchase, a ridiculously small sum for him, but obviously impossible for her. The cashier waited with professional patience, showing neither judgment nor particular empathy. It was a scene I had probably seen many times in that neighborhood. Other customers began to queue behind the young mother, some looking at their watches with growing impatience. It was at that moment that the woman uttered the words that would haunt Matteo for weeks. "I'm sorry, I have to return the milk." Her voice was broken not so much from shame as from deep weariness, as if she had hoped until the last moment to have enough money, but had always known that it would not be possible. He took the can of powdered milk and handed it to the cashier, who set it aside without comment. The screen now showed $13 for bread and diapers. The woman counted her money again, this time more confidently, and gave it to the cashier along with $3 in crumpled bills that she took from the back pocket of her jeans. While the cashier prepared the change and put the purchases in a plastic bag, the baby continued to cry louder and louder. The little girl asked with devastating innocence, "Mommy, what about milk for your little brother?" The mother bent down to her, stroking her blonde hair, and whispered something Matteo couldn't hear, but which made the girl smile. Watching this scene, Matteo felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Shame. Not the social shame of being associated with something unpleasant, but the deep moral shame of someone who realizes they've been living in a bubble completely disconnected from reality. As they left the supermarket, the mother with the baby who was crying more and more desperately, the little girl jumping around, oblivious to the tragedy unfolding, Matteo stood frozen among the magazines, realizing that this woman had just experienced one of the most humiliating moments of her life in his supermarket, with its prices under his commercial control. That night, in his quiet, perfectly air-conditioned chalet, Matteo couldn't eat dinner. He kept thinking about the baby's cry, the little girl's innocent question, the look in her eyes. That mother who had to choose between feeding her child and buying diapers to prevent diaper rash. For the first time in his 20-year business career, the numbers in his reports didn't seem like abstract figures, but rather a reflection of real human lives, of families struggling daily against poverty, while he maximized profits. In the following days, Matteo couldn't concentrate on the usual financial reports. The image of that mother forced to return the milk continued to haunt him, transforming every business decision into a moral dilemma. During board meetings, while the executives discussed the price increase for the next quarter, he saw the face of that little girl asking for milk for her baby brother. He decided to return to the supermarket in Vallecas, this time not as an inspector, but as a silent observer of the reality he had ignored his entire life. He dressed in jeans and a sweatshirt, put on sunglasses and a baseball cap, and spent hours in the store aisles studying customer behavior with completely different eyes. What he saw shocked him. Mothers calculating every penny before putting anything in their carts. Elderly people comparing prices for minutes on end before choosing the cheapest product. Entire families splitting up along the aisles to optimize their time and find the best deals. He had built an empire selling food, but now he understood that for many people, grocery shopping was a daily battle against the humiliation of poverty. On the second day of observation, he saw the same woman again. This time she was alone. She had obviously left the children somewhere and held a list written on a crumpled piece of paper. He followed her at a distance as she moved through the store with precise movements. Without wasting time in aisles that weren't useful, she only picked up discounted products or cheap brands, checking every price with the obsessive attention of someone who can't afford to make mistakes. At the checkout, she had 9 items: pasta, rice, milk, bread, a package of sausages, bruised bananas on sale, dish soap, a package of diapers, and a box of children's paracetamol. The total was $23.40. This time she had the exact amount, which she counted twice before handing it to the cashier with a shy, triumphant smile. Matteo followed her out of the supermarket, keeping a respectful distance, and watched her walk for 15 minutes to a 1970s social housing block with peeling plaster and windows repaired with tape. He watched her climb 5 flights of stairs. The elevator was obviously broken, with the shopping bags visibly weighing down her thin arms. That night, Mateo called the HR director and asked for information about the employees at the Vallecas store. He wanted to better understand the neighborhood, the clientele, the social situation in the area. What he discovered hit him like a punch to the gut. 40% of the families in the area lived below the poverty line. Youth unemployment exceeded 35%, and many of their most loyal customers were people struggling to afford basic necessities. The HR director, thinking the CO was considering closing the store, from the sales point, citing low profitability, he began listing the supermarket's problems: low margins, customers with little purchasing power, and increasing shoplifting. Mateo stopped him mid-speech, realizing that he himself had created a system that viewed customer poverty as a problem to be solved by closing stores instead of lowering prices. That night, in his quiet chalet, Mateo made a decision that would change everything. He called his assistant and asked her to get him all the data on the stores located in low-income neighborhoods. He wanted precise numbers. How many families did they serve? What percentage of their income did they spend in his supermarkets? How many children went to bed without dinner because their parents couldn't afford to complete the shopping? The data that arrived in the following days was devastating. His supermarkets in poor neighborhoods had profit margins of 25% on baby products, double the European average. A family with 2 young children spent an average of $150 a month just on milk, diapers, and baby food. Are you enjoying this story? Leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Now let's continue with the video. Almost 20% of the average income in the area, and the most shocking statistic, according to market research commissioned by his own company, was that 30% of mothers had admitted to skipping meals to ensure their children were fed. Mateo realized that his success was literally built on the hunger of Spanish children. Every time he had raised prices to improve margins, he had condemned some families to impossible choices between basic needs. His $800 million empire was stained by the cries of babies who couldn't be fed because milk cost too much for their mothers. The third time Mateo returned to the supermarket in Vallecas, he made a decision that his financial consultants would have called madness. He called an emergency meeting with all the staff and announced something revolutionary. All baby products would be sold at cost with zero profit margin. In addition, any mother who couldn't complete her shopping for her children would have access to a family fund. Anonymous. The manager pointed out that this would destroy profitability. Mateo looked him in the eye. Well, it was about time. In the following days, while the legal team structured the No Child Without Milk program, Mateo observed the first effects. The mother, who had returned the milk, came back the following Tuesday, unaware of the changes. At the checkout, the total had been reduced by half. Thinking it was a mistake, the cashier explained the new business program to her. Mateo saw that mother burst into tears of gratitude. For the first time in months, she could buy everything without having to choose. She left with 3 bags instead of 1. Walking briskly, the news spread quickly through the neighborhood. The supermarket filled with families who came even from far away. Contrary to all forecasts, sales increased by 40% in 2 weeks. The families who saved on milk and diapers spent the money in other departments. The success in Vallecas convinced Mateo to revolutionize the entire company. He called a meeting of the board of directors, presenting the revolution of dignity. Extend the program to all 347 supermarkets in the chain, offering basic necessities like milk, bread, pasta, rice, and over-the-counter medicine at cost to families in need. The reaction was devastating. The finance director estimated a 60% drop in profits. The marketing manager spoke of unfair competition. The managing director threatened to resign, but Mateo had the data from Vallecas. Increased sales, greater customer loyalty, and a rise in overall revenue. Above all, he had the thank you letters from the families. The vote was close. 6 against, 5 in favor, and 1 abstention. As the majority shareholder, Mateo decided to move forward despite management's opposition. The implementation transformed the public perception of the Santana chain. The media reported stories of families rescued from food insecurity. The most profound change occurred within Mateo himself. The man who had always optimized profits discovered a new kind of satisfaction in the smiling faces of the mothers. He personally visited every store, not to monitor numbers, but to listen to stories and understand needs. The transformation required sacrifices. He sold the villa, liquidated his art collection, and gave up his private jet. But each renunciation seemed insignificant compared to the joy of seeing children fed and mothers no longer forced to choose between dignity and survival. A year after implementing the dignity revolution, Matteo faced unforeseen consequences, some wonderful and others devastating. His supermarket chain had become an international case study, analyzed by economics departments as an example of ethical capitalism. Delegations of businesspeople arrived from all over Europe to understand how it was possible to combine profit and social justice. The final figures were surprising even to Matteo. Despite the drastic reduction in margins on basic necessities, the company's overall revenue had increased by 35%. Families, who had previously shopped with anxiety and shame, now frequented Santana supermarkets with confidence, spending the money saved on essentials on other items. Customer loyalty had reached record levels, and marketing costs had been reduced to practically zero thanks to positive word of mouth. It replaced any advertising, but the success also came at a high personal price. 6 members of the board of directors resigned, selling their shares and publicly accusing Matteo of betraying free market principles. Some competitors launched a smear campaign, claiming that the revolution of dignity was merely a publicity stunt masking tax evasion or other illegal activities. The toughest battle was with his ex-wife, who reappeared in his life with a lawsuit seeking a larger share of the estate, arguing that his philanthropic endeavors were depleting assets that also belonged to her. The divorce, which had been finalized peacefully 5 years earlier, transformed into a legal war that ended up in all the gossip columns. But it was during this personal battle that Matteo had the encounter that definitively changed his life. In the Madrid courts, while waiting for his hearing in the case with his ex-wife, he noticed a young lawyer who was pro bono representing families facing eviction for non-payment. She was beautiful, determined, and spoke of the rights of the poor with a passion that immediately fascinated him. Her name was Elena Marquez. She was 30 years old, and she dedicated 60% of her legal time to pro bono cases for families in financial difficulty. When Matteo approached her to introduce himself after the hearing, she immediately recognized him as the millionaire who gives away milk to the poor and looked at him with a distrust that completely disconcerted him. Elena had read in the newspapers about his social initiatives, but she remained skeptical about the true motives of a wealthy businessman who suddenly became a philanthropist. When Matteo asked if he could invite her for coffee to discuss his charitable endeavors, she replied curtly that she didn't have time for chats with millionaires seeking cheap redemption. The challenge had been issued. Matteo, who had achieved every professional goal he had set for himself, found himself, for the first time in his life, having to prove the sincerity of his motivations to a woman who wasn't impressed by his financial success but wanted concrete proof of his social commitment. 2 years after meeting Elena, Matteo had transformed not only his company, but his entire existence. The lawyer's initial distrust had gradually transformed into respect, and then into a profound love, born from their shared daily commitment to the most vulnerable. Elena had not only agreed to become his life partner, but had also become the director of the Santana Foundation, a non-profit organization Matteo had created by dedicating 70% of his personal assets to the fight against child poverty. Together they had opened free soup kitchens for families in need, distribution centers for essential goods, and a microcredit program for single mothers who wanted to start small businesses. Their wedding, celebrated privately in a small neighborhood church, rather than in the cathedral in the historic center, was attended by hundreds of families who had benefited from their social programs. There were no magazine photographers or VIP guests, but rather mothers with their children nourished by free milk, parents who had managed to maintain their dignity thanks to discounted prices, and elderly people who could afford essential medicines. The revolution of the dignity, meanwhile, had spread far beyond the confines of the Santana Company. Other Spanish entrepreneurs had begun to copy the model, creating a national network of ethical supermarkets that guaranteed basic necessities at affordable prices. The government had studied the Santana case to implement public policies to combat food poverty, and the European Union had invited Matteo to Brussels to present his model as an example of good social practice. But for Matteo, success was still measured in very concrete terms. Every time he walked into one of his supermarkets and saw a mother shopping with a smile instead of anxiously counting coins, every time a child could drink enough milk to grow up healthy, every time a family could afford the dignity of choosing what to put in their cart, he knew he had made the right decision. The woman he had seen returning the milk that first day in Vallecas had become an unwitting symbol of the revolution. Matteo had tracked her down months later and discovered her name was Sarah. She was 24 years old, had 2 young children, and a husband who had lost his job in construction. Now Sarah worked as a volunteer coordinator at one of the Santana Foundation's food distribution centers, helping other mothers who found themselves in the same situation she had been in. On the 2nd anniversary of the Dignity Revolution, Matteo and Elena returned together to the supermarket in Vallecas where it had all begun. They found Sarah at the checkout, no longer as a customer in need, but as the program's coordinator. No child without milk for the entire neighborhood. Her 2 children, now healthy and grown, were coloring behind the counter while she coordinated the free distribution of baby products. When Sarah saw them arrive, she ran to hug them both with tears in her eyes. She told them that this was the strangest family in the world. A former millionaire, a lawyer for the poor, and a single mother who had become like a sister to her. But it was also the truest family she had ever known. That night, in their modest but loving home, Matteo and Elena looked at the photos from the day together. In one of them, the 3 of them, Sarah, Elena, and Matteo, were surrounded by dozens of people. Of children eating free ice cream in the supermarket courtyard. They were all smiling, all seemed happy, all part of a revolution that had proven a simple truth. When wealth is put at the service of love instead of greed, it doesn't become poorer, but infinitely richer. Matteo hugged Elena tightly, looking at that photo, thinking about how the sight of a mother forced to return a can of milk had changed not only his company, but his soul. He had lost millions of dollars in profits. He had given up unrestrained luxury, faced legal battles and fierce criticism, but he had gained something priceless. The certainty of having transformed his life from empty success into a love full of meaning. And every night, before falling asleep next to the woman who had chosen to love him, not for what he owned, but for what he gave, Matteo thought about all the children who were going to sleep that night with full stomachs thanks to his revolution. That was the highest dividend his life had ever produced. Like if you believe that true success is measured in lives changed, not in profit. Comment with the moment in history that has most impacted you. Share to inspire other entrepreneurs to put humanity before money. Subscribe for more stories of transformation and social justice. Sometimes, seeing a mother return milk is enough to understand that your empire is built on children's hunger. Sometimes, the true revolution begins when you choose to lose money to gain dignity. And sometimes, the greatest love is born when 2 people decide together to change the world, one family at a time, because true wealth isn't counted in the bank, but in the smiles of those who no longer have to choose between eating and living. Yeah. See?